السلام عليكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول محمد سيد الأول والآخرين مدد يا رسول الله ولا شاء الله فازنا إن شاء الله طريقتنا والصحبة والخير في الجمعية. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم في عناقهم السلاسل يسحبون صدق الله العظيم. Boyunlarına zincirden, demirden zincirlerle ateşe sürüklenir diyor.
Allah Almighty describes the state in the Holy Quran of those who will be put into hellfire as follows. He says that they will be dragged into hell with chains made of iron.
Bu nedir onlar? Cehenneme gider. Onlar boyundaki şeyler.
Those who will go into hell in the hereafter, they will have chains around their necks.
Yolarlar demirden zincir olarak oluyor.
And they will have chains made of iron around their necks by which they will be drawn into hell.
Bunlar günahlar.
And what are these chains that will draw people into hell? These chains are sins.
İnsanın boynuna dolanıyor.
The sins people commit throughout their lifetime turn into chains which will drag them into hell.
Boynunu tutuyor, her tarafını tutuyor.
The sins people commit throughout their lifetime will turn into chains around their necks, around every part of their body, which will imprison them and drag them into hell.
Ufak tövbe etmese Allah muhafaza etsin.
And these chains will increase if people do not ask Allah Almighty for forgiveness. Little by little, people will be confined more and more by these types of chains.
En sonunda koca zincir olup kıyamet günü hakiki olarak zahir olur.
And that chain will increase with every sin one commits. And if you do not ask Allah Almighty for forgiveness, you will add more parts to that chain, and it will turn into a huge chain, which you will then see on the day of judgment. That chain, which will draw you into hell, will become visible and apparent.
Belli olur. Kıyamet günü bakarsın, bazı insanlar böyle hayvan, köpekler nasıl bağlarlar şeyin tasmayla, aynı şekilde ama bu defa demir zincirinden.
On the day of judgment, you will therefore then see people who will have around their necks chains like leashes, like similar to how people put leashes to dogs in order to drag them. You will see on the day of judgment people who will have chains around their necks like leashes, and these leashes are made of iron.
Ne için ondan kurtulmak da kolay da hayattayken.
Therefore, while you are still alive, it is easy to get rid of those leashes, to get rid of those chains.
Tövbe istiğfar edersen,
if you ask Allah Almighty for forgiveness, you will get rid of that chain.
O ufak sana boynuna dolanan şeyler Allah kaldırır onları.
If you ask Allah Almighty for forgiveness, you will get rid of those chains which will be put around your neck little by little with every sin you commit.
Başka yaparsan gene aynı şekilde Allah'a yalvarıp tövbe istiğfar edip gene yapacak.
With every sin one commits, new parts will be added to that chain, and that chain will grow. That chain around your neck will grow. However, if you ask Allah Almighty for forgiveness, every time you ask Allah Almighty for forgiveness for your sins, those chains will be broken up, and you will be released and freed from those chains.
Kalkacak. Yani o senin elindedir.
So it is still within your hands while you are still alive.
O tasmaları, şeylerden kurtulmak senin elindedir.
It is still within your hands to get rid of those leashes of your sins while you are alive.
Allah Azze ve Celle affı sever,
Allah Almighty loves to forgive.
af dileyeni affeder.
And Allah Almighty forgives those who ask for forgiveness.
Onun için ufak ufak olsa da bu bir şey değil demeyin.
Therefore, one must ask constantly for forgiveness. Regardless of the size of one's sin, one should not say, this is just a small sin. No, you should ask for forgiveness.
Zaten bütün günahlarımız için tövbe istiğfar edip
You must always ask for forgiveness for all of your sins.
o günahları Allah Azze ve Celle affıyla affeder.
And if you ask Allah Almighty constantly for forgiveness every day, Allah Almighty, through His mercy, will forgive.
Yok, ısrar edip de sen kendi kafana göre ben tanımam etmem dersen o vakit Allah muhafaza etsin, ahirette sıkıntısını ilelebet çekersin.
However, if you remain to be stubborn and if you insist on committing your sins and if you do not accept and do not mind and do not care about the sins but you continue to repeat those sins, then you will undergo a distress and affliction in the hereafter which is going to last forever.
Kolay değil.
A sin is not something easy.
Dünyada bir ufak bir sıkıntı için millet ne yapacağını şaşırıyor.
And the price you will pay in the hereafter for sin will last forever. And just think about those moments of distress and uncomfort or affliction you may experience in this life. You try everything to get rid of that affliction.
Halbuki ne için? Çünkü Allah Azze ve Celle unutmuşlar.
But how bad it is going to be if that affliction is something that is going to last forever. People are now in a state where they have forgotten about Allah Almighty.
O sıkıntıyı götürsün diye başka türlü daha beter boyunlarına tasmayı takıyorlar.
And it is through seeking refuge with Allah Almighty that one can release and free oneself from those bad habits, and one can release oneself from the distress and affliction one undergoes. However, people do not come to Allah Almighty in order to get rid of their afflictions, but instead they resort to bad ways which make things even worse. They commit sins, thinking that this will make things easier for them. However, it burdens them and adds more and more to the chain which will appear in the hereafter.
O dünyadaki tasmalar da var. Onlardan da kurtulmak bazıları zor oluyor.
Those bad habits people have throughout their lifetime are like leashes, and it is difficult for people to get rid of those leashes.
Mesela bir alışkanlık olur. O alışkanlık senin vücuduna da zarar veriyor.
People may have various types of bad habits which are bad for your body.
Maddi olarak da zarar veriyor. Aile hayatına da zarar veriyor.
It harms your body. Those bad habits harm your family. It harms you financially in all regards.
Onu atmak zor oluyor.
And those bad habits are like leashes, and it is difficult for people to get rid of them and to free themselves.
Onun için onu tasmayı boynuna koymadan önce o tasmadan uzak durmak lazım.
Therefore, one should stay away from those bad things before it is too late and before they turn into bad habits, before they become a leash around your neck.
Bir defa deneyelim olur. Bir defa daha derken tasma iyicene boynuna dolanmış oluyor.
People say, let's try once, and then they say, let's try again, and then let's try again, and without noticing, every time they do this, it becomes a bad habit which turns into a leash around their necks from which they can no longer free themselves.
Ondan kurtulamıyorsun. Her türlü günah devamlı yapılan alışkanlık. Bazı alışkanlıklar var.
And this applies to every sin. even whether it's a small sin, every time you repeat it, it turns into a bad habit, and it becomes a leash around your neck.
Vücut için onlar kurtulamayan çok insan var onlardan.
And there are many people who have become used to their sins or bad actions, and it has become their habit, and they are unable to free themselves from those bad things.
Hafif var, ağrı var. İyisi yok tabi. Tasmadır.
And there are sins which turn into habits. There are light sins or heavy sins. But regardless of whatever sin you may commit, there's no such thing as a small sin, because every sin, once it becomes a habit, it turns into a leash which makes it difficult for you to free yourself from.
Onun için günahtan elinden geldiği kadar uzak durmak lazım.
Therefore, one must stay away from sin as much as one can.
Günah iyi bir şey değil.
A sin is never something good.
Kötü bir şey.
A sin is always bad.
Onun için Allah Azze ve Celle affediyor.
But Allah Almighty, He forgives.
Ama kendine de eziyet olmasın diye tasmayı boynumuza takmayalım inşallah.
And therefore, ask Allah Almighty for forgiveness, but before it's too late. And you don't need to make yourself suffer. Therefore, stay away from those things, and do not put that leash around your neck, that leash of bad habits of sins.
Allah muhafaza etsin.
May Allah Almighty protect us.
Allah tevfik. El-Fatih.